As you know, I get my wisdom from the Page a Day Zen calendar. So this past weekend, I had a provocative saying, "We are the universe," pretending to be individuals. We are the universe, pretending to be individuals. Deepak Chopra. He has some good things. In fact, that's a recent book of his which I have called "You Are the Universe." So if you want to check that out. But it's a very Buddhist idea. I mean, it's a very mystical idea that not just an idea, it's the reality. That's why we're only pretending to be individuals. We actually are the universe. Modern astrophysics and microbiology proves that as well. So that's what we're trying to wake up to, that we are the universe. Everything is interconnected, and we are that, as they say. But it's especially, I especially like the idea of, it's the universe in an evolutionary framework, a more modern evolutionary framework. We can appreciate this even more. That, for the last, 14.5 billion years, the universe has been expanding and getting more complex and more expansive to reach us. And who knows how many other billion, species on this planet and elsewhere that we are also. So it was coming from below. Too often we imagine ourselves, we're souls that came down from heaven and, got into this mess down here. But we can see it from below as well, that we are the end result, or not even the end result, we're still going on, of the striving of the universe, and that's who we are, the whole universe is that. Right. In Catholic theology, it's the same kind of thing in recent decades. We talk about Christology from above or Christology from below. Christ is coming down from above and becoming incarnate, but you can also see it coming, the second Adam is what the universe is producing. So you can see it from both directions, and both are true. The Kundalini coming down, but also coming up. So that's a whole added perspective which helps to appreciate that, I think even more. But the fundamental reality is that we're pretending to be individuals in the sense that it's not our truest self. It's not false. It's the true self, false self thing, the false self which isn't false, it's just inadequate and insubstantial and passing. And whereas our deepest identity is the whole, is the universe. There are a number of koans which express this very well. The first one, the main one, is Shakyamuni himself, as he became the Buddha and realized that he was Buddha nature. The first koan of the Denko Roko, which says, as the morning star rose, Buddha was enlightened and said, "I and the great earth and all beings simultaneously achieved the way." So it was no longer Shakyamuni in that sense, the pretending to be individual. It was the Buddha who realized that the great earth and all beings simultaneously with I, and the I was no longer his individual ego I that said that, have it simultaneously right here and now achieved the way. Another koan which I also often like to quote is the 60th one from the Blue Cliff record, where Yun Men has his staff, and he holds up his staff in front of the assembled monks, and he says, the staff is transformed into a dragon, which swallows up the whole universe. And he says, so mountains and rivers and the great earth, again that same word, great earth, where are they now? Well, I mean, they're there, but what they are, but the whole, the staff, the dragon, a symbol of enlightenment and of totality, which we are, is the whole earth. The mountains and the rivers and the great earth are all subsumed in the staff, which is the dragon, which is us. Another way of saying it's the whole universe. And then I'm going to bore you by quoting again those two paintings which I have on my bookshelf. The paintings done by Amy Yee, who is going to become a teacher in December, a sensei, working with Roshi Kennedy for many years, partly on this. 2012 paintings. Roshi did the calligraphy, and Amy did the painting. So one of them is called Boundless, and is the quote from Dogen, which I've quoted before. The true person is not a particular individual, just pretending to be individuals, right? The true person is not a particular individual, but like the deep color of the vast blue sky, is everyone, everywhere in the world. So the true person, you, is everyone, the Christ, the Buddha. Love your neighbor as yourself, because it is yourself, all right? So there's that, and then the other one, soaring with eagle's joy, which is what it feels like, is a quote from the Upanishads, which says, this tiny space within the heart contains the vast universe. The heavens and the earth are there. The sun and moon and stars are there. Wind and fire and lightning are there. And everything that is and everything that is not. From the Upanishads. So even what is not, even the whole potentiality of what could be is there. It's an amazing, amazing thing. So that's what we have to wake up to. It's the way things are. It's being. However, another way we can approach this is also through consciousness. Being, consciousness, bliss, that Hindu trinity. So this is the consciousness part as well as the bliss part, the soaring with eagle's joy. There are different levels of realization of consciousness. I mean, that should be one of the first things we come to realize in our practice, is that, there's the pretending to be an individual, egotistical, self-centered, monkey mind. But then there's so many other levels of consciousness that we blossom into, that we already are, but we haven't woken up to. And that's, what the great metaphysical systems, the great epistemological systems show us. Oh, and by the way, the Sunday quote is, everything will come exactly as it does. So everything is right here as it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. But the consciousness part, of course, as you know, Ken Wilber is one of the most famous for presenting all this, and not everyone finds him to their taste, which is a pun. I'll come back to that in a minute. But there are some fascinating presentations here of the different levels of consciousness that have become quite popular. And they correspond to what I found in the Kabbalah, what I found in recent writings of Cynthia Bourgeois, also in the Shurangama Sutra from centuries ago. They have these various levels of consciousness. The metaphysical levels of called desire, form, and formlessness. There's different levels of being, but especially different levels of consciousness. So as we begin the spiritual journey, and enter into the levels that Wilber will call psychic and subtle, it's the level of soul, of archetype, of doing that work of emotion, and also the level of higher mind, of intuition, the subtle realm, as he calls it. This corresponds still to the level of form in those. And, in Buddhist presentation, manas, the level of mind that you get to, is actually still considered one of those sense levels, the six senses, really. One is mind on that more basic level. But above that are higher levels of consciousness. The seventh and eighth consciousness, as it's called in the Shurangama Sutra, not just the sixth, which are more and less, still individualized, but more and more subtle and more inclusive and expansive, until finally you get to the eighth consciousness, which is kind of the store consciousness, which is the direct connection to the boundless. And this is the level of formlessness in the Shurangama Sutra, the highest, which he calls the causal level, which is the highest level of mind, before you get to what the Kabbalah calls ayin, nothingness. In Buddhism, emptiness, the boundlessness, which he calls one taste. That's where the taste comes in. He didn't make that up. One taste is actually from Tibetan usage as well, which is the whole, the pure consciousness beyond any kind of individualization or any kind of specification. And that's what we ultimately are. That level, the causal level, that formlessness level, the seventh and eighth consciousness, is what he calls and others call the witness. Now, hopefully this is something you get to not too far into your practice. You become aware that hopefully pretty soon that you're not your thoughts and you're not your feelings, that there's something deeper and richer and more basic than those things. You don't have to identify with all your thoughts and feelings, your opinions and all that other stuff. That's why we try and get beyond it. That's the ego level that we were mentioning before, that you're pretending to be. This higher level is the witness. So you stand back and you can watch it. You have that experience, right? You can finally stand back and watch the ego and its games and its silliness with a certain detachment. Mm-hmm. So who's watching? It's not your ego anymore. Is it you? Well, what level of you are you talking about? Precisely, the causal level, the subtle level. This is the witness with a capital W at various levels of, finesse and subtlety. And he has some fascinating things to say on this one chapter. And this is the Essential Ken Wilber, with some excerpts from his stuff published in 1998. And this chapter talks about the witness and this one taste, which is above it. That we are. Freedom and emptiness, release is what we're looking for. But they said the separate self, that false self, that superficial self, the ego self, arises in consciousness like everything else. So you can see it. It's there. It's there. It's not non-existent, but it's not ultimate. And he says it can feel, once you have this level of distance, it can feel like a slight, he says it's like a slight contraction, which is interesting, a way of describing it. You can watch the ego kind of congeal, contract. There's a slight contraction there, as would be like a muscle contraction, as he says, because it's a more circumscribed and limited thing. And we shouldn't try and get rid of it. It's not evil. It just is inadequate, not ultimate. So as he says, the witness loves everything that arises just as it is, the ego included. The only thing that wants to get rid of the ego is the ego, right? I want to get rid of this ego. Who's saying that? The ego is. Sorry. It's not the witness. You just have to get beyond it, that's all. And not be duped by the ego. But it has its uses, as Richard Rohr and others point out constantly. So you're not playing the game, So the ego is not a thing, but a subtle effort, he says. That's interesting. The ego is not so much a thing as a type of effort. Interesting. So the practice is you rest in the witness, and then you rest in emptiness. You notice the self-contraction. You don't try to see the witness as an object, because it's not. It's just the seeing. But you can also see the ego without trying to get rid of it. As he says, those would be errors. And then you get to while you are there resting as the great witness or emptiness, one taste might more easily flash forth. Now that's the ultimate non-duality, beyond even the causal level of formlessness, formlessness sounds like it's the ultimate, right? But not according to the sutra. Beyond that is the nothingness, the emptiness. No kind of consciousness at all other than the pure consciousness, which you'd call Buddha consciousness or even divine consciousness in our own tradition. So that's the place where one taste can flash forth. Rest in that freedom, he says, openness, emptiness, release. Feel the self-contraction. You don't try to get rid of the clouds and the trees or the ego. You just let them be and relax in the space of freedom that you are. And from that space of freedom, he suggests, at some unbidden point, you may notice that the feeling of freedom has no inside and no outside, no center and no circumference. The sky is floating in this freedom. The world is arising in this freedom. And you are that with a capital T. The sky is your head. The air is your breath. The earth is your skin. It is all that close and closer. You are the world, as long as you rest in this freedom, which is infinite fullness. This is the world of one taste, with no inside, no outside, no subject and no object, no here versus there, no without beginning, without end, without ways, without means, without path, and without goal. Then he has a section about the waves. He says practices sometimes get you to try to feel a particular kind of wave, maybe wavelength, which I would contest a little bit. I think all practices are trying to get you beyond that. But as practices, maybe they're geared to one particular wave, maybe the breath, or and the wave in the ocean. We're really just waves on the ocean. He says, no. What one taste is, he suggests, what the ultimate is not a wave at all. It's just the wetness. That's really good. It's just the wetness, which is everywhere and everything, including the ego and the birds and the trees and the flowers, which is why he has a wonderful section here when he says, when you get beyond the causal realm and you get into consciousness as such with a capital C and a capital S, he says, it's all radically all-pervading, one without a second. At this point, and not before, he says, all levels are seen to be perfect and equal manifestations of this ultimate mystery. There are no more levels, no dimensions, no higher, no lower, no sacred, no profane, which is why Zen, he says, can describe it this way. As the wind sways the willows, velvet beads move in the air. As the rain falls on the pear blossoms, white butterflies lilt in the sky. That's why so many koans in Zen are just about right here and now. It's your hempen shirt, it's the oak tree in the garden, it's holding up a flower, it's the washing your bowl for breakfast. It's every tiny little thing is everything. You don't have to get more and more abstract and more subtle, as if the ultimate is to become so abstract. Sometimes meditation presentations make you feel that you just kind of eventually disappear in this vast abstraction. No. Everything is it, including your ego, including everything, as long as it's lived from this perspective, where everything is wet. You're all wet, in the good sense. And that is the ultimate, realization that you are the universe, and everything in the universe is included, the tiniest little thing. So whether you've got, the highest bodhisattva that you realize you are, or whether you realize you're just that little grain of sand on the path in front of you, it's the same. There's no higher or lower, outer, no dimensions, or it all just is magnificently. So that's what we're trying to, not trying. That's what we realize we are when we realize we are that full dimension of reality. So, any comments, or anyone want to share about being the universe, or not? All right. Well, let's sit for a second, for a few.